This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.
Hello, everyone. This is Vince Versace, National Managing Editor of the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, joining you today for this special meeting of the pods here on the Construction Record. I'm excited to be talking to Todd Weyandt of the Bridging the Gap podcast. Great podcast. If you haven't heard it, download it. Obviously, still download ours, but download Todd's too, and listen to his as well. A lot of great perspectives discussed on his pod, and this is why we wanted to share with our listeners as well and do a meeting of the pods here in March with Bridging the Gap. Todd, welcome to the Construction Record.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Vince. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, same here. Maybe for the sake of our listeners, give a bit of perspective to your podcast and maybe your firm, who you work for in construction, just to give them a bit of context.
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast, as you mentioned, is Bridging the Gap. We focus in on the innovation and the innovators that are going out in construction and MEP in the subcontractor world as well. And really like to highlight what all the cool things that they're doing. You know, I often say that the construction industry as a whole has a marketing problem in that they're not very good at telling their stories of the innovation and the technology that is happening in the industry. And it's way more than what people think of the industry for. So that's what we like to tackle on the podcast is kind of breaking down that misperception that some people have of the industry and highlighting all the, frankly, just the cool things going on in the industry and the people making that happen. And then as far as my day job, I'm a director of creative marketing at Applied Software. It is a software technology company that goes into all of AEC, whether it's on the software side, on Autodesk, or we have our own products that we've created that help enhance the Autodesk products. And then we have a consulting arm as well too, that comes along and helps people build out what's the right workflow for you in your business and how to get you where you're wanting to be to meet your business goals.
All right. Perfect. And for your listeners that will be listening to this as well. So the Construction Record is a podcast that's built on Canada's two heritage newspapers that have been covering construction for a combined 200 years. So that's the Daily Commercial News, which is based in Toronto. It's been around since 1927. And the Journal of Commerce, that's based in Vancouver, BC. It's been around since 1911. Now, as two heritage old papers, they're not in print anymore. Yeah, and this podcast is a result of that innovation as well, trying to share the stories of the industry, the intel that we collect with the stakeholders of the industry. Right. And it's been exciting the last 3 years with the Construction Record podcast, because we know it's a different demographic of the new leadership in construction here listening to us. But the great thing, and maybe it kind of happens to you too, Todd, I'm surprised sometimes by the people who do listen to us. And the assumption of it's just a 40-year-old guy that's the superintendent driving to the site, that assumption would have blown out of the water for me after the first 6 months with this podcast, because we had guys that are like owners of projects, the older generation, going, hey, I can listen to this when I'm waiting for my flight to go to Ottawa or LA or wherever my site's in the States. Or, it's like some of these older guys, we started to kind of felt nice to be a catalyst for them to start thinking of different ways. So our podcast is built on that, on the two publications. We're owned by Construct Connect, based out of Cincinnati. Our parent company is Roper Technologies, based out of Florida. And essentially with Construct, we are a one-stop shop for people looking for project information and intel in the construction. So if you want to get an idea on, on prognosticating like what you need on a site, what kind of software can help you with takeoffs, what can help you with invitation to bids, Construct Connect has that whole suite of services. But here we are as the newspaper arm. It's church and state, which I have to give kudos to my owners. You know what I mean? They don't influence us and tell us who we got to talk to, who we need to interview. They understand it's legitimate journalism happening, even through this pod. So it's pretty awesome, right? So, but
cool.
But we wanted to talk about, well, besides just cross-podding and meeting, but talk about disruption in the industry, right? And
a little bit going on over the last year with disruption.
just a touch, right? Talk about what is it? Necessity being the mother to invention.
That has most definitely been the case this last year for construction.
Yeah, for sure.
Everybody.
And what is it? Through some of the guests that you've been talking to, I guess maybe we'll give context to our listeners here collectively. What are you hearing on that front? You know what I mean? Is it being embraced? Is it being challenged? Where are the roadblocks? I can give you some of the Canadian perspective too from this end, but go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. One of the things that I think has been kind of a blessing in disguise through this past year is the forced digital transformation of the construction industry. A lot of the tools that the industry has adopted now out of necessity, they've been around for a while. It's not like Zoom was a brand new thing, or even Teams is, or, any name your technology that has been adopted over the last year. None of it was really new. It was just the adoption was new, and people had to figure out how to make it work remotely. And so I think that the blessing in that is there's been technology people and there's been innovators out there kind of saying, you can do this. This is possible. It's not that scary. And this last year proved people that they were right, that the water is warm. It's not cold. It comes from in the waters, and that they could make it work when they had to, and not just make it work as a Band-Aid, but really thrive in it and get a whole new layer of efficiency moving forward in their day-to-day job, that it really does have a big impact.
Sure. I think that's the thing, proving the efficiency and the productivity of it. That's the sense that I got from some of the folks we've talked to through our reporters and the pod.
Yeah.
Around, embracing kind of the forced change COVID did. And it's like, it wasn't just a matter of like, you just put your things on PDF and post them on your website. That's not, you know what I mean? The disruption in digital change. We're actually talking about fundamental change in how you communicate, how you proceed through a project. And I mentioned to you in our pre-chat, in the green room chat, we'll call it that, where we're
the behind the scenes chat.
The behind the scenes chat, where there's like Skittles and fine water, bottled water. Right. I'm lucky enough to have been asked to be a member of a board of experts for this group called ACO Innovation Lab here in Ontario, Canada. So it's a cross-sector group of public owners, private owners, residential construction, civil, and us as media that covers construction. To talk about the roadblocks and challenges with innovation and what needs to happen. And it's the same, the one, like we had our monthly meeting this week, and one of the things that came up was COVID did in 1 year what could probably take 5 to 8 years usually with most firms as far as adopting something new. That's kind of like what the research is showing and what the stakeholders are telling us as members, right?
Yeah.
And it's like in 1 year, it forced it through. Right. And so it's curious to see what the back end looks. That's kind of the discussion. Like, how does this look on the back end when we come out of it? Right. Does it stay? Does it stay embraced, or does it evolve? What do you think? What do you see?
It was a question that I was asking repeatedly when we first went into this time last year of, okay, people are adopting it now, but are they just using it as a Band-Aid, and are they building it out in a way that's sustainable for the long term, or is it going to just totally crash and burn in a little bit? Right. And I think for sure that there was some Band-Aid patching going on this time last year when nobody knew what was going on, and they just knew that they had to get it, and so they didn't build it for the long-term success. However, the longer this is going on, I know I was one of those people that did not think that we would still be here this time in a year.
Yeah.
They're having to go back because they proved the use case for it. So now some are going back and rebuilding it, or they've already have kind of figured out some of the kinks in it to build it long term. So the longer we're all remote, and I think you've seen the industry really shift in mindset, and they have bought into the concept. Now, as if things go back to whatever the new normal phrases, I think you'll see some backsliding for sure, but I don't think it's going to be as big as what it would have been if everything had opened back up in 3 or 6 months. I think that a lot of this is here to stay because people have seen it worked out. And so once you've tasted that efficiency gain that we talked about earlier, why would you want to give that up?
Right.
I think you have to, those people that are going to want to go back to the old way, they have the bigger hurdle to convince people and to argue that we should go back to the old way and give up those efficiencies and go back to workflows that didn't work well.
I agree. There's an issue here that we've been discussing. There's certain construction associations that are mobilized to really lobby the federal government and the provincial governments to look, you got to free up more funding, improve the capital that's accessible for municipalities. Because what they've noticed over the downturn this year is that municipal tenders for projects and works here anyways are down, right? Because municipalities are dealing with a whole host of other problems right now. And what will make those firms remain competitive is the discussion we've kind of been having as a knockoff of this problem, right? What will make them competitive in that new normal until everybody gets back to bidding and tendering projects the way they used to? The efficiencies they found through technology, through innovation, that may make them prime candidates to secure that new work, right? At least that's the hope, right? Some of them seem to understand that, but some don't, but I think it's a lost opportunity if people backslide. Like if this goes on still, right?
Yeah. One of the things, I'm a pretty hyper competitive person, so this speaks to my language of competitiveness, but I say that if you're not the one doing it, your competitors are doing this. They're going to keep those efficiency gains. They're going to keep pushing the envelope. This kind of innovation mindset is only getting a bigger foothold in construction. It's not going away. And so if your company is one of those that are putting your head in the sand and saying, oh, it's a fad, I'm going to wait till everything goes back to the new normal, I just don't see how you compete long term over the next 10 years. I think that you're going to be so far behind that when you finally say, oh, well, now is the time that I need to start competing in this race, you've already lost it, because you have 5 years now to catch up to where everybody else was a couple of years ago. So it just keeps on. It's a compounding problem for you.
Yeah. And I find that we're talking about the user as far as the firms. What I've also noticed is the recalibration of the people trying to bring the innovation and so-called disruption to the industry, right? Like we had that first wave about 5 years ago of people really embracing BIM, really embracing LEED, like other project but it was hit and miss, right? As far as who was using it and whatnot. And I held a panel early on, halfway through the pandemic, first year of the pandemic last year, with some of the innovators I had known before who had come back to try to bring back their product, their app, their software, their technology into construction. And they found a lot more of a receptive attitude, but not necessarily because the construction, this is what they were telling me, not necessarily because the construction industry all of a sudden said, okay, open arms, teach me. It was more like they also learned from their mistakes 5 years ago. Right? 5 years ago, it was like, look, we're going to come in and Uberify this part of your business. We got the silver bullet. We're coming in. And what did they find 2 years into it? It's like, oh my God, this is a mess, right? Because they didn't consult or collaborate as well with their clients' clients. This is what they were telling me back in July when I talked to some of them. It's like the lesson learned now, and we're able to execute during this pandemic. We know the necessities there, but we know how to build that collaboration and partnership. So these are the innovators, the guys bringing in the new tech. They're like one of them was telling me, is like, now when I brought in my stuff to the road builders, because he was this app that looked at material delivery and scheduling. He's like, I talked to some of these firms and said, let me talk to 10 of your clients, big and small, and see what their needs are, not just what you think your needs are business wise, right?
Yeah.
And that's where he saw the success and the uptake. Right. So I don't know. It almost seems like a perfect marriage. Like I'm hearing from some of these innovators. It's like, in a way, COVID's allowed them to come back at it, but with a refreshed approach and attitude, not as the Uber silver bullet solution, but as a partner and collaborator.
Right.
And I thought that was kind of cool to learn that,
Yeah, absolutely. And, I really think that that's the key. And what I'm taking away from what you were just saying there is humility, that you need humility and approach people when you're talking about workflows and changing, is have that humility of, it's worked in the past, and there's probably a good reason why it worked in the past that might not carry through in the future. But I think when you come in and say, oh, everything that you've done to make you a successful company is wrong,
Right.
and here's what you need to do now going forward. Well, you've just alienated a bunch of people because they're going to have their defenses up and they're going to have their guard up. They're not really going to be receptive to what you're saying. But if you come in with some respect and humility and say, hey, you've built a great company, but here's where the industry is going. And this is kind of why here's, 1, 2, 3, why what you're doing now is not going to be working as effectively into the future.
Right.
It makes it just less combative conversation that people
For
have.
sure. Yeah.
I think the culture aspect and communication in construction is such a crucial ingredient that oftentimes gets way overlooked, and something that we focus a lot on with our conversations on Bridging the Gap is how do you, for not to use the name, but how do you bridge that culture gap and just create that greater sense of cohesion throughout the industry. So I'm curious, from your vantage point, what do you see as some of those kind of key building blocks that firms really need to have to establish that foundation for a healthy technology adoption and change?
Sure. No, great question. I'm going to steal right from your answer. The one thing that's become abundantly clear, especially during the COVID era, to call it that, has been the humility aspect. Is because now I've seen firms that I've been familiar with the 13 years I've been here at the DCN, at the Daily Commercial News, ones that were really hard to, like, even with social media, they weren't even interested. And some of them were like even members of my editorial advisory board. And they told me, look, I have my 14-year-old kid do my social media, right? Because they weren't believers in it, right? They were so skeptical. So the skepticism from that point of view about what it can do for me, because my granddad started this business 60 years ago. My dad was doing well with it. I'm doing well this way. Why do I got to change?
Right.
That building block is there. The humility and being receptive to listen to a new idea is key. I think that's the key one, because the efficiencies are there. Like, I'm sorry, but it's inevitable. Even with our industry, meaning the subset, the journalism industry and our newspapers. Look at the evolution. A bunch of papers weren't ready for we could argue about other stuff around Google and Facebook, but they weren't ready for that change, and they got steamrolled. Big heritage newspapers of big metropolitan cities in the US and Canada, done, because they weren't ready or receptive. They wanted to stick to their old ways. So I draw from that experience, even as the national editor, is like being humble, yes, and being ready for the change, and how to, not all the tools, but what tools will make my product better, and collaborating with the people that are bringing that product. Collaboration and openness is going to have to be key. And I'm pleasantly surprised right now by looking at that, because this industry is a laggard when it comes to any type of innovation. The studies have been done globally, let alone here in North America, about how slow to adopt on a lot of different things. Right. So
only do it when you have to. It's kind of the standard mantra.
Exactly. Like I come from a construction family. My dad built residential homes, to give a bit of context. And I give this example to some of the innovators, the people that want to bring innovation or people that are being reluctant to it. And I say, like, look, my dad, passed away 3 years ago, but before he passed, one of my best friends, who's my son's godfather, is a civil engineer. So he's got CAD, he's got BIM, he's got all this stuff on his laptop, right? Then you got the son here, who's got all these innovative tools for news sharing. And my dad, who was a residential home builder, I remember one afternoon spent with him watching what BIM does. You know what I mean? And he sat there and went, oh my God, the time that could have saved me. You know what I mean? But back then it was the late 70s, early 80s, right? He's like, if I had only had this at my hand, at my fingertips, right? And I thought that was encouraging. You know what I mean? It's like, here's a 60-year-old man who's kind of looking at this current tech going, and you got the language barrier coming from Italian descent, right? Kind of understanding this tech and going, whoa, I could have made way more money. You know what I mean? Saved a lot more backs and hands, as he said, right? Because I could have spaced out my trades better, could have done things a bit better. And I tell you, Todd, like that, I still remember that afternoon clearly, because it's like, if it could have worked for that old man, you know what I mean, who was, who was pretty tough on those sites, but he would have welcomed that technology if he was still in the game, right? So considering the younger leadership and the demographic change happening, both sides of the border in construction, like you said, I think you got to get on the train, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You can't miss it. right?
Yeah, that's a great story. I think as we're talking about the humility aspect of it
Mm.
with COVID, I think one of the things that it did was it leveled the playing field because everybody was affected by it. So no matter if you were the highest up in leadership or you were the intern just starting your first day, you were affected by what was going on, and you were all dealing with the same experience at the same time. And so nobody knew what was going on. And so it forced people to approach those conversations on a level playing field, which I think was good for the construction industry to kind of knock some of the um, ego and chip on your shoulder off, and have people approach each other with a shared humanity almost. I know that sounds super ethereal and all that stuff, but I think it's true that people were going through the same thing, and so they were on the same
they had
field,
to,
which is great.
Hey, look, this industry doesn't matter what continent, it's siloed. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? North America, here it's siloed. You know what I mean? In Europe, in Asia, like there are the incredible similarities of this industry, though the language changes is there, right? It's one of the oldest trades, one of the oldest professions in the world, right? And the issues exist. You know what I mean? About adopting stuff and union versus non-union, subs versus GCs, and the innovation question is that. And it's curious to see the jurisdictions worldwide that have really embraced it a lot better than almost North America at some points, right? And,
for sure.
And that's what it is. I think there's the humility. You have to be willing to embrace it. But how about you with the podcast in the end? The podcast itself, has it evolved over the last year? Your podcast?
Yeah, crazy evolved. I was talking to somebody the other day about starting a podcast and stuff, and those first few episodes, I cringed listening back to those first few episodes. So if you subscribe, please don't listen back to the first few episodes. Nothing against the guests. The guests were great. It was all on my part. I think we started with wanting to talk about the innovation and what was going on there, but we for sure have found our voice just so much more over the last couple of years of doing the podcast and getting our sea legs about it. It's a whole different animal doing podcasts and telling those stories. And so there's definitely a learning curve there. How about you?
Well, it's funny what you just said. We celebrated our 100th episode back just before the new year. It was like in December. Thanks. And we made a deal of it, right? Like we thought, okay, look, there's plenty of podcasts that have hit 100 episodes.
That's a big mark though. You got to celebrate it.
Yeah, you got to celebrate it. And because of the pandemic and everything, everybody being down, let's give people, because we have credit to our listeners, those that are listening to us. Thank you. You know what I mean? Like, not to steal from Bette Midler, but yeah, you're the wind beneath our wings, right? You guys give us the hard criticism and the good kudos too. And just like you, like I listened back as we were preparing the content plan around celebrating the 100th. And I listened to the first few episodes and I went, oh my, those are awful. We cannot steal from these at all. You know what I mean? To show, but the growth, okay, that's 3 years ago, right? We were essentially a bi-weekly when we first started. We were once every 2 weeks.
Gotcha.
And once the pandemic started, once we mobilized March 16th, we all started working from home, March 16th, 2020. The thirst for information and for the storytelling just picked up. Yeah. And we thought, okay, all of a sudden we were so inundated with requests and ideas. It's like, well, we can't go every 2 weeks. We got to go weekly now. Right. So it's like, okay, let's transform and evolve into a weekly format, which then changed our format because we're all podcast fans. And all of a sudden our Friday podcast started to become a bit more long form, kind of like This American Life, kind of like we're talking a lot. We're producing these episodes now to a degree.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but we don't forget our bread and butter, which is our news. So now just this past month, we introduced our Wednesday podcast, which is strictly our news podcast. Right. And I can't believe that within a year. And it's not because we wanted to do it. It was the demand was there. Why? Because people are a lot more office space. I'm sure you look at your stats and your analytics and you see where they listen from, where the downloads happen. And you're like, a lot more people are listening because they have a bit more time, right? We were afraid because we knew we had a commuter culture amongst our listeners. And we thought, okay, with less people driving to site, flying or taking trains, we're going to see a drop. Instead, we saw the reverse. Right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. You know, I love getting those. You mentioned getting the feedback from your audience of kind of driving what topics you're talking about. For me, that's one of my favorite parts of it, and hearing what people are saying and their views on it. And that has driven a lot of the topics that we talk about, is people reaching out to me and saying, hey, you know, I really appreciated this aspect of it. Have you thought about, you know, going into this direction of it? No, that was a great idea. Let's do it. Usually if they reach out, they are going to be pulled on the show in the end. So I guess disclaimer, warning,
Yes,
I'll probably wrangle you on, but it's always good stuff.
Right. No, for sure. I don't know. As we wrap up, what do you see ahead for this year in the end, as far as, you know, your connections and what you see in your landscape for construction in general? Do you see an uptake in activity down south or where you're involved, or?
Yeah, for sure. You know, my area, I'm down in Georgia, and construction didn't really slow down a ton throughout all of the year. It changed. A job site for sure changed. So I think you'll see a lot of things start opening back up a lot more. I also think that the technology, like we said earlier, it's not going away. I think if anything, it's going to be ramping up. And what I see, which is really exciting to me, is those innovative voices used to kind of be the people crying out into a wilderness. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that there's a lot more people talking about innovation and, frankly, even demanding it and technology adoption for construction, that wave is just getting bigger and bigger. So the digital disruption that really got just a jolt of energy last year for construction, I don't see that slowing down at all.
It's cool. I mean, and for us, it's kind of along the same lines, except we did have some shutdowns in some of our major jurisdictions. So as I alluded, the biggest issue facing our industry right now for this year is, can they get the money flowing to the municipalities? So, you know, so they can start letting out some work, because major projects, major stuff isn't being put out to tender because municipalities are focused on other issues right now. So, but I don't see a change in the innovation of the industry. Even just looking at today, the discussions I had with folks, sure, some of them are shilling to be, you know what I mean, guests on future podcasts, right? You know what I mean? But they're bringing up some interesting ideas where I was like, wow, I didn't think about that sector, looking at innovation that way, right? So it's there, it's churning, you know, so I expect another year of just kind of great ideas coming out up here in this market. It's just a matter, is there enough work to get people going, right?
For sure.
Because comes into the other issues my reporters are reporting on around vaccinations and job sites. You know, for us here, one of the bigger questions is, once the first wave of vaccinations go through, especially with healthcare workers and whatnot, will construction workers be deemed some sort of level of essential to get their shots? And so that's something that the industry is trying to figure out, you know, with the public health units in government.
Yeah, so, for sure. I do have one final question for you. You know, you mentioned about the newspaper really adopting and growing with the podcast space, and being able to kind of change what your bread and butter was, and adapt to the demands that are happening. How do you feel that applies in construction? What can construction learn from that in adapting to the changing circumstances that they might face?
Well, I can give you, because I have 2 editorial advisory boards for each newspaper. Right, so we have one out west and one out east. For the DCN has a bit more. The Daily Commercial News, based out of Toronto, has a bit more of a national audience. So the construction stakeholders that we have on our board, the guys that hold my feet to the fire around stuff, right?
Yeah.
The curiosity that came with, because the Daily Commercial News actually went digital last year. So the one that had been based since 1927, we had roadmapped it to go strictly digital by 2022. But, you know, it was like, well, maybe this is the year to rip the Band-Aid off. Everything else has been blown up and thrown up in the air, right?
Yeah.
We've been planning for this, so why don't we accelerate the plan a bit? So when the board members were asking, like, how do we plan for this? Because they saw us do this with the Journal of Commerce, the Western paper, which is, you know, over 100 years old. But that one, there was no need. There was no pandemic. We just did it because it was time, right?
Right.
The biggest lessons when people were kind of following us, the board members were asking me how it was going. is like, I kept on saying to them, what I mentioned to you is like, be open. You know, like I know I protect the daily commercial news, and my staff does. It's like, because it is the daily construction newspaper of Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a special space for it, and especially the influence that it has with government and provincial governments, as far as people understanding what's happening in the AEC space,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I basically told my stakeholders, is like, be open, be patient. You know what I mean? But roadmap your stuff. Talk to the people you're collaborating with, and I understand, because that's lessons learned from being at past newspapers as well, right? Like, talk to the people that are going to help implement your change, you know, and be ready for some stuff. Maybe it's not going to stick, and you may have to change. Like, it's not going to be a single solution. I remember telling that to my board. It's like, it's not going to be a single solution. You know, we're going to try this out. If it doesn't work, we'll tweak it, but we're going to be open to that, you know, and not throw up our arms and panic and go, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Iterations. It's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally is. And just like this pod, it was, no one expected it to be what it is right now as of today. When I was talking to my pod team, it's like, how did we get to here from there? You know, everything was working really well the other way, but this is great too. Like, we love it, but did not think we would innovate this way and have, you know, all these kind of extra opportunities to tell stories of construction. Right. So that was the big thing I told the stakeholders, is lessons learned is be patient and embrace it. But also, at times we held, not that we weren't stubborn, but we knew what was important about our product that needed to be reflected in the digital space. And we held on to that, you know what I mean? And made sure it could still translate. Right. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That openness to change is huge. What does innovation really mean to you?
Innovation means to me growth. It means viability, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's true, there's a lot of cliches you and I can take out around innovation, but it leaves you behind if you don't embrace it. And no one that says you have to embrace it to its full extent either. Embrace it in your own context and how it will make your firm or your product better, and be patient, right? And make it happen, right? Like, just don't be skeptical if it doesn't hit the first time, you know? Like, we were talking about our podcast, joking about it. It's like those first few, like, we cringe now, right? So do we. And I look at those numbers from the first month or so, I'm like, wow. You know, if those numbers had continued, would I still be here 3 years later, right? But we believed in the product, and we believed in the process, right? So I think that's the thing, right? How about you? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think that's great. My editor always challenges us to what's 1% that we can do better every time we do something. Just look at for 1%. I think that's huge. That really does embody innovation. For me, innovation is not trying, and to me, I think we have to redefine failure with this whole concept. And failure is not what people typically think of a failure, of just falling flat on your face. That you can learn something not to do, and you can learn something how to get better. But if you never take the shot, you never try, that to me is just the utter failure. So be bold, be willing to try something new. I love your point on just being open to what's coming, because you're going to be surprised at when you are open to whatever may come. That's when the innovation really happens. Like, you guys didn't think that you would do 2 podcasts in a week.
Yeah.
And now you're open to it. Now it's working great for you. So
exactly.
That's definitely an innovative idea that you were open to. It's great.
I bring back the example. I know we're winding up, and I won't do story time with Vince too much longer for your listeners. My listeners are kind of used to it, but it's just like, I'm of the graduating class here in Ontario as far as journalism students, that we're in that class of still developing photos in the darkroom, but then learning the first digital cameras. So I'm in that bridge graduating kind of slate of journalists.
Bridge the gap there.
Yeah, bridging. Yeah, there we go. Bridging the gap. You know what I mean? For the construction record. Yeah. I got to figure out how to employ and get my name in there. but it's that I remember that moment, because I still remember talking with our photo teachers. This is going back now, 28 years, right? But it's like, black and white photography was the coolest thing, right? You're sitting in these rooms, you're working on your sheets, and you're seeing the image come to life, and this beautiful process, right? Yeah. And then the first digital camera comes in that was like, God, like an anvil now when I think about it, that first one, right? And it's like, whoa, that photo's right there. And I can take multiple photos and not worry about film and how much film do I have on me. Like, I remember the lights going off with a lot of us, You know what I mean? Like, well, this is gonna be the game breaker. This is gonna change things, right? Like, because back then there was still a lot of skeptical thing, like, oh yeah, whatever. You know what I mean? Who's gonna really get into that? Just the techies. No,
Right.
not the case at all, right? We got reporters reporting from phones now.
Right.
All right.
That are just as good a quality taking pictures as a real camera.
Exactly. You know, and like I remember having to run to a phone booth to call in a story that was breaking when I worked for one of the dailies here in Toronto, right? It's like, imagine that. Like I had to make sure I had a quarter on me, write the story in one of these notepads because I didn't have enough time to get back to the newsroom and call it in on a payphone. Not even a cell phone.
That's funny.
Right. And now it'd be like you see the recording, people are recording live right away. Here it is. This is what I got. Posting, right? It's changed, but the ones that have succeeded embraced it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Saw it as a positive change, not a negative change, right? And I would hope construction can do the same. You know, and I guess that's maybe the role we play with our 2 podcasts, right? To paint the picture for them of what could be, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree. Love it.
Well, love that. With that, you know what I mean? Thank you so much, Todd. I really enjoyed it. I think we could probably go for a couple more episodes, I think. But
yeah, sounds like it. I appreciate it, Vince.
No, I appreciate it too, Todd. Good luck with everything, and stay safe, and thank you.
Thank you. You as well.
This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.